Welcome back to the Hybrid Real Estate Professional Podcast. Today, in this solo episode, I break down the mindset shift it took for my wife and I to go from buying $200,000 rental properties to leading an over $9 million ground-up development project for Everwood Reserve, our assisted living community we're building in Texas. I'll walk through the frameworks that helped us get comfortable with risk and share why playing it safe started to feel like the real gamble. So before we get into that, I'm Aaron Amin. My wife and I built a portfolio of 8 cash-flowing rental properties across 3 states over 3 years while bringing 3 children into this world. This podcast is a documentation of my journey, not only to build that portfolio, but more recently, we have made a very strong pivot into residential assisted living, which is an asset class we believe is positioned to benefit for decades to come. So we took our single-family portfolio and we're making some pretty big consequential decisions around what to do with those rentals and how we can position ourselves for this next phase of our real estate journey. So our real estate journey started with a single rental property about 1 mile away from where we lived. And when I talk about putting myself back in the headspace that we were in when we made that decision, that felt like one of the craziest things we could ever do. It was really hard for us to make the decision to pull the trigger on that first rental property. We were buying about as safe as we could. It was a newly rebuilt home. This was 2019. It was a newly rebuilt home. All the mechanical, everything had been replaced literally from the ground up. All the appliances were brand new, nice flooring, nice finishes in an up and coming neighborhood. And we put 30% down so that we could even have a lower monthly payment. And this was in the era of 3.5% investor interest rates. So it's hard to envision a safer play than what we did with that first rental. But it still just felt crazy. It felt crazy at the time because the idea of putting such a large chunk of capital into a home and then having to operate and actually be involved in the outcome of whether or not it's profitable versus putting that same money in the stock market, it was just a foreign concept at the time. So I just want to validate I know there's a lot of people listening to this podcast that are either buying their first property, considering buying their first property, or maybe they've already bought a property and they're trying to figure out how to be more intentional about it. That early fear of what this decision could mean for you and your family and your finances and your perception of where the downside is in that risk is totally, totally valid. It's something that we went through quite a bit before we were able to do it. But once we got in and we got a taste of what the upside is on that idea, the risk also became clear why people are willing to do this. So that first rental, fast forward, like I said, we bought 8 rental properties over the course of 3 years across 3 states. Clearly, our relationship with risk changed over that period of time, or we would not be willing to do that. So what happened in that period of time? So a good portion of this was before we had kids, and we had 3 kids in 3 years. So not only were we changing and growing in our relationship to money, our relationship to entrepreneurship, to real estate, we're also growing in our personal lives into parents, which is a huge shift, right? Your whole relationship with risk, your relationship with growth, your patience, your behavior, everything really does change when you have kids. And I don't mean to sound overly dramatic with that, but it's true. A lot of how you view the world, how you use your time, everything kind of shifts. So I guess in some sense, we were forced to grow no matter what we decided to do. But it just so happened to play really well that we were falling in love with this real estate entrepreneurship during that period of time. We went from that one house about a mile from our primary residence into buying multiple properties in a very short period of time. Now, for those who aren't familiar with our story, our second and third rental respectively, we actually bought and they were already leased to residential assisted living operators. So that was where we got our first taste of this asset class, residential assisted living. And it was a model that I didn't even know about before. So I always thought of assisted living as these big nursing homes with hundreds of people and people walking around dressed like a hospital, basically, not like a home. So this was the first taste into that home-like environment where people were getting assisted living services in a residential environment. And so I won't pretend that that's the moment that we decided to do what we're doing now, but it gave us that exposure and that taste. But what also happened with that is that we went from 1 rental to 3 rentals in the course of about 6 months. And so our identity really grew, and I embraced very strongly the identity of being a real estate investor. It went from, hey, let's try it out with 1 rental property to all of a sudden we have 3, and we have 3 different bases of tenants. We have 2 leases with a company. And this is a real business. So I had to grow into that. It went from being, essentially paralyzed and afraid of investing in one single property that was newly rebuilt from the ground up with a very safe 30% down payment. We went from being almost paralyzed by that decision to all of a sudden to buy that second and third property, we had to sell out of a ton of stock. We had to do some financial repositioning of our own just to be able to afford those. And so I can't overstate how quickly that mindset shift went. We started to understand what it takes to be a profitable deal. We started better understanding how to account for expenses. And we started to understand the upside potential. That's the other thing. If you're just taking risk in a vacuum and you can't actually recognize where the upside might be, then of course you're not going to want to take that risk. In real estate investing, one of the most powerful concepts I can think of is this idea of owning your upside. When you buy, especially using bank leverage, when you buy a piece of real estate, all of that appreciation, that future appreciation and the loan pay down, that all belongs to you. And so the value that you create from that asset, it belongs to you and the goals that you're trying to advance for your own family and your own purpose. Now, of course, a lot of people might position the counterpoint of tenants are the ones making you rich. So what's up with that? That's kind of a separate discussion here. But I would say that you ultimately, when you start to view yourself as a contributor to the economy and the communities that you're a part of, if you're being fair, if you're being a good landlord, if you're providing good housing and service, and you're charging at or near market rent, I do not think that you are the problem in society. So again, all of this kind of mindset shifting around single family rentals, our place in the community, our ability to engineer our own upside, and the fact that the risk is correlated with a very, very strong reward, that helped us get more courage when we decided to do things like invest out of state. Now, the other big barrier we started running into over time, fast forwarding, is that we started running out of our own money. We were dual income, no kids. And then we had our daughter in 2021, and then we had twins in 2023. Our financial profile changed dramatically. So we went from that dual income, no kids, where we were living in a cheap market in Las Vegas, very low personal expenses, and we weren't making a ton of money, but we were living in a way where we could save money and we could snowball our rental income into buying more rentals. And no matter who you are, at some point you run out of personal funds. And we hit that point, and then it really kind of changed the strategies that we had to employ to continue to find ways to grow towards our objectives. I believe that it should be tied to an outcome that's meaningful for you and your family, because sometimes creating extra complexity can make things worse in your lifestyle. It can put you in a higher risk position that might not be lined up with your long-term goals. So that's another shift. As we had kids, sometimes that actually makes you have a lower appetite for risk versus higher. So then it begs the question, as we're about to take on a $9 million+ development deal, well, that sounds like the riskiest thing we've ever done. And we have 3 kids. So how do I square those two? Number one, our timeline changed. So we built a cash flow stream of about $5,000 a month in net profit from our rental portfolio. I'm very, very proud of that because I think it's one skill to be able to build a portfolio that generates positive cash flow. It's another to be able to keep that money as profit. Positive monthly gross cash flow is different than the net profit that you actually put away and can use for future growth. So I'm very proud of that outcome. Now, what sounds crazy, maybe at the surface, is that was basically the ceiling of where we could get with our current portfolio. Most of our equity, most of our money and our net worth on paper is tied up in real estate equity, which is not accessible to us at the time. We had low interest rates, so we felt like there was not actually responsible ways to access that equity and continue to grow and increase the ceiling on that $5,000 per month net profit. So the math changed for us. We lost an entire income. My wife had to take 2 separate breaks from her W-2 for maternity leave, and it created this kind of different track for our family and our financial goals. What's going to give us the financial flexibility that we need to arrive and then ultimately thrive as a family? And also as a parent, I became keenly aware of the fact that we have a very limited window of time where our kids actually want anything to do with us. And so right now, my daughter's 3.5 and our twins are about 1.5. And that window is closing quickly. Yes, you have 18 summers of them in the house, but from age 12 and up till they graduate high school, hopefully we still have a good relationship, but I don't think that we're their everything the way that they are right now. So there's this window of time, this window of opportunity. There's the amount of money that we need to sustain a household of 5 people. in the modern world. And then there's our growth goals and what we want for fulfillment and impact for our family. So this all kind of circles back to risk, right? So in order to achieve those higher financial goals, we had to be willing to incur a certain level of risk. We could either go back to W-2 jobs and continue to climb the ladder, which I still plan to do, by the way. But my wife had to make a similar decision. Did she want to slot back into a traditional career path and try and grow her income year over year, few percent at a time, and continue to advance in responsibility? Or do we want to own our upside, just like we originally thought about with our rental portfolio? And the way we thought about that, there's asymmetric risk when it comes to a project like the one we're taking on. The downside, even though it's pretty big, you're taking on millions of dollars of debt, you're taking on investor capital, there is a lot of downside. There are a lot of things that could go wrong that would be pretty devastating for us in our reputation, our family, our investors, and it is worth considering and thinking about those situations. However, that downside is capped. There is a limit to how much you can, in theory, lose in this situation. But the upside, the additional upside we're creating by building our own brand, aligning behind this vision we have for senior care, building actual physical structures, taking raw land, getting it rezoned, creating additional value for the community, senior care that has not only high demand right now, but has decades of tailwind behind it, right? So the upside in this situation is significantly higher than the downside. And of course, the traditional logic of high risk, high reward, this is a great example of that. There's a ton of downside risk, but the upside risk is significantly higher, especially if you have a strong business plan. So it's thinking along that asymmetric risk idea. There are frameworks about what's a reversible versus an irreversible decision. Jeff Bezos calls these one-way doors or two-way doors. One-way door means once you walk through it, no matter what, you can maybe rescind some of the consequences of it, but for the most part, it's an irreversible decision. So in this case, taking out a $7 million loan, raising investor capital, potentially millions of dollars, those are irreversible decisions. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. You could repay the loan. There's a number of different ways to maneuver so that you don't lose everything. But those are decisions at which point you are taking on that risk and you are beholden to the bank and your investors for the results of the project. That's an example of something you can't come back on. So being just aware of that, being aware that this is irreversible. We're also planning to sell 1 to 2 of our rental properties in order to take the capital from that and all the equity that we have trapped and roll it into this project. So there are some things we're doing that we cannot undo. And I think just being aware of that and then being comfortable with it because we believe so much in the upside of what we're doing, that's another risk reward trade-off that just is really helpful. And then on the flip side, two-way doors, right? So there's sometimes in this process where there are micro decisions that are reversible, changing things with the site plan, choosing which vendors to potentially work with, putting them on provisional basis and trying them out. There are micro decisions within the broader decision to do this project that are reversible. So categorizing those two types of decisions also really helps us with risk. The third thing is regret minimization framework. So the idea is that it's rooted in a simple question. If you fast forward 10 years from now, will you regret not trying this idea? Now, in this particular case, this doesn't apply to every situation, but in our case, my wife and I were at a crossroads, right? She had just come back from her second maternity leave in 3 years, and we had a really big decision to make for our family. Do we rally behind this impactful cause that clearly my wife and I both have a passion for and need that society has, and bring other investors in on the opportunity and create wealth for a whole section of people that we love and care about? Or do we slide back into a traditional W-2 role? I'm mainly referring to her in this case because I'm already in a W-2 role. But that was the fork in the road we were at. With extreme confidence, I don't usually speak on her behalf, but in this case, I know that if we don't at least indulge this idea and give it a shot, then there will be some regret involved. And yes, you can argue that with 3 young kids, it's a really difficult time to be taking those risks. But thankfully, through the risk that we took earlier in our real estate careers, it would really, really suck to take a few steps back in our net worth and in our wealth building journey. But we have a couple exit plans with our current portfolio that if this really did fall through and the project didn't move forward, it would suck. We'd be taking 1 or 2 steps back, but the amount that we would have learned and being able to try and make sure this project's viable would far outweigh that loss in the long run. So even with just answering this question, will we regret not trying? We know the answer is yes. Therefore, we're going to do everything in our power to make this project happen and make it successful, not only for ourselves, but for all the value that we believe we can create for the world. So these are honestly just some of my thoughts around the mindset of risk. Obviously, there's a lot of tactical things that we've done, bringing on mentors, joining mastermind groups, building a ton of relationships, doing unbelievable amounts of research and validation of our business plan. This is not what this episode's about. There's plenty of time to talk about the tactics, but I just want to explain some of the mindset of how we started with a very difficult decision that most people start with, which is, do I buy my first property? Do I even start? How do I get in the game and get past that fear that I'm making an irreversible decision that's only going to realize the downside? How can I recognize the upside that I'm now creating for myself and my family and act on it and continue to evolve and grow into it over time? So I hope this episode was helpful. I had a lot of fun recording it. If you like this type of content and mindset stuff, I'd love to know about it. I love talking about it, but I don't want to do it on deaf ears. So drop a comment or shoot me an email and let me know what you thought. And I would love to hear if you're going through something similar. So share one risk that you're taking right now that you're unsure of, and let's work through it. Thank you. Thank you for making it to the end of today's episode. As you may know, podcasts are very difficult to grow organically. If you're getting value from today's episode, I'd deeply appreciate if you can take 30 seconds to leave my show a 5-star rating and review. This will go a long way to helping me reach more listeners just like you. Thank you so much in advance.